To our webinar, a live webinar, Protecting Your Business Against Ransomware Attack. We appreciate everybody joining. I mean, honestly, this is a very important subject these days. You know, it's a conversation that's happening at the boardroom level, the C-level, all the way down throughout entire organizations, down to the user level, right? Because some folks are getting exposed to ransomware, you know, within their personal lives. So no matter the vertical you're in, no matter your risk model, really no matter the organization and culture that you're in, this is a threat to business, and it's something that we should all be concerned about. So thank you for joining today. So just a little bit of housekeeping. You can see our social media links on the left. This is going to be recorded. We'll definitely have a replay available so you guys can go back to this later on. So please, follow us, subscribe to YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and you'll be able to get this content and other great content as well. There will be time for questions, just so you know. Please put them in the chat here in Teams, and we'll be able to cover those toward the end. And ultimately, this conversation can continue, right? This isn't the end of our conversation. This is something that we're very passionate about here at Envision. We want to make sure that our customers, our partners, and really the ecosystem of the relationships we have, we're having this level of collaboration with you folks, because again, cybersecurity, I really consider a shared responsibility, and the more intelligence we can share, the more best practices we can share, the better off we're all going to be. So again, this conversations can continue, and you can reach out to us. So here's my contact information. We tried to make my email address a little bit easier. My name is Jason Albuquerque. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Envision. Jason ABQ. So for those who don't know, ABQ is the airport code for Albuquerque, New Mexico. It makes it a lot easier. You don't have to worry about spelling my name, and you can reach out anytime and ask questions. My phone number's there. Not so easy on my Twitter handle, but please feel free to reach out and follow me there. And as always, any content and information you can find on our website. So just a little bit about me and my background. I've been in technology well over 20 years. I started in the United States Marine Corps. I went to their School of Electronics and Communications, ultimately managed the Direct Air Support Center, which is a communication link between the ground and the air troops. So, that's where I kind of cut my teeth on technology and security. And from there, I went to work for a company called Symantec. Some of you may have heard of them. And then had stints in IT leadership, working for the public sector, in municipal technology, and then off to professional services organizations. Before I came on board here at Envision, I was the CIO and Chief Security Officer of a $500 million IT services organization and managed services organization, where I actually started the cybersecurity practice there, from an offensive security perspective, a consultative perspective, and really had a successful practice, and ultimately came over here to Envision to really expand that and build a practice here, help the company grow, and honestly take it to the next level. So a little bit more about me. I received and I was honored with by ISC Squared in Security Magazine, one of the top 2021 cybersecurity leaders in the world. I mean, it was very humbling to have my name alongside of the CISO of Microsoft, and have some folks who worked at Cisco and some really well-renowned folks in the industry, and be part of that team. So, it's definitely an honor there. I'm on Congressman Langevin Cybersecurity Advisory Board, and for the folks who don't know, he's congressman here in Rhode Island, and co-chairs the Cybersecurity Caucus in Washington D.C. He's the OG in cybersecurity in Washington D.C. He is 10 years in the running or more, supporting cybersecurity strategies at a federal level, at a private sector level. He really saw the risk way ahead of most in Washington, D.C. So hats off to the congressman for that. And it's an absolute honor to be on his advisory committee. And then, just on the side in the community, I'm a host of Business Security Weekly, which is an international podcast. It's won multiple awards at RSA. I'm lucky enough to be a contributor there and a co-host, and be able to bring in some of the best cybersecurity experts in the world and interview them, and really talk about leadership in cybersecurity and aligning cybersecurity to the business and making it a business imperative, right? A business strategy, a differentiator, and helping, aspiring leaders grow in their organizations. And then also from the community, I'm very, very involved in helping groom future cybersecurity leaders. I'm not sure if folks know, but there's a huge talent gap in cybersecurity these days. ISC Squared came out about a year and a half ago with a report. There's 3 million, more than 3 million unfilled jobs. So ultimately, I like to partner with, you can see a picture there, the Girl Scouts. I actually help Girl Scouts get their cybersecurity badges. We spend about 3 or 4 hours together, and we get them all of their cybersecurity badges to move on. I partner with Skills for Rhode Island to help mentor and really get involved in the community, the K through 12 community, the Rhode Island Department of Education, their CTE programs, and really try to help promote IT and cybersecurity out there so we can be building that next generation of workforce. So that's a little bit of my community involvement. A little bit about Envision. So we were founded in 1998 and we're headquartered in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Honestly, we're a full scope technology in cybersecurity company, information technology, professional services, managed services consulting firm. We specialize in transforming your business, really helping you innovate and grow. And we have a diverse set of talents here. You can see from traditional infrastructure consulting to digital transformation, cybersecurity, web development, and full scope development arm, and really offering that full suite of IT services to our clients, and ultimately being that business partner, right? We pride ourselves on building solutions through technology to really help our customers solve business problems at the end of the day. So we're more on that partnership to help you innovate, grow, transform. We're not here to be a transactional partner. We're here to be a long-term partner that's going to help you through that journey of digital transformation for your organization. Just a little bit about our security team. We have decades of experience here, everything from cybersecurity advisory and assessments to program and digital trust strategies, helping organizations identify risk and remediate those risks, and then helping you through your organizational security training, maturity modeling, your program development. So ultimately, that full scope of cybersecurity offer that can help you not only assess, but defend as well. So we're very proud of the team here, and we have decades of experience in helping organizations mature their cybersecurity program and ultimately mitigate risks that are out there today. So for our agenda, ultimately, we want to talk about, number one, the current state of ransomware in the environment and out there in the industry. Demystify some of the myths that are out there. It's a very complex scenario. I mean, cybersecurity itself is complex, but the way ransomware operates these days is complex as well. So we want to talk about current state, demystify some of the myths so you can understand where we're at. Talk about risk insights, the profile of attack to help us get visibility into how these malactors are attacking organizations. Get some threat intelligence so you can see those passive attack and help you protect your organization and your infrastructure from these type of malactors. And then really, what are some best practices we can do to defend against ransomware attacks these days? Because really that resilience in our organization is going to be the most important to help us get through any type of attack if it happens. So let's get started with our first agenda item, demystifying ransomware. And this is really going to take a deep dive, right, and level set on some items that we need to know about in order to protect our organization. In order to really get ahead of the game and ahead of these malactors, we have to understand what we're dealing with. It's a complicated topic, like I said, not only from an incident response perspective after you get attacked, right, responding to it once an attack happens, but building that resilience program to protect your organization and mitigate as much risk as you possibly can, having that layered approach in the technology and the processes and the controls that are needed to defend your organization. It's very complicated, and ransomware is a complicated topic. So we really want to demystify some of these myths that are out there. So first, let's talk about the attack versus the actual program itself, right? So ransomware is used in many, many different ways. But ultimately, ransomware is a program, right? It's a tool. It's a tool that these malactors use, and it's a weapon in their holster. They use it to encrypt your data, encrypt your systems, ultimately hold you at ransom, right? So they can get money from you. It's a monetary gain that they can achieve. And ultimately, that piece of ransomware is the weapon, right? But there's a ransomware attack process, and this is what I really want folks to understand. It's not a situation where an email comes in, somebody clicks on something, and all of a sudden your entire network is encrypted. It's not that simple, right? These malactors are smart. They want to get persistence in your network. They want to get intelligence. So there's a process that they have where they can access your organization. They do a level of intelligence gathering. They find your crown jewels. They escalate privilege so they can find access to additional resources within your environment and be able to pivot to those. And again, I mentioned these stages of attack because they're important. A ransomware attack has a process, and that process, an attack process, gives us indicators that we can use to prevent these type of attacks before the actual detonation of that ransomware happens, before your data gets encrypted, before your systems get encrypted, before that ransomware starts to spread. So by knowing, that attack path that we're going to go through a little later on in the session, it's going to give you those indicators of compromise that you can use to defend. So it's very, very important to know these stages and the difference between the weapon itself and the attack process that these malactors use to hold you at ransom and to encrypt your systems and get those crown jewels and data. So second myth is, why are we a target, right? Why were we targeted if you get hit? Ultimately, I'm going to be honest with you, most likely you weren't, right? Unless you're a Lockheed Martin, unless you have some international intellectual property that nation state actors are looking for, you're normally not a target. Just know that ransomware is a business model. There's automations in play. There's interactions with payment sites that they have. There's syndicates of organizations that work together, and they have different services that they provide to each other. And ultimately, they want to find and or purchase a foothold within your organization based on vulnerabilities that are exposed while they're out there searching for organizations that are exposed. And they want to get that foothold, right? They want to get that persistence within your organization so that way they can get the monetary gain. They're very, very opportunistic. They're out for the dollar, they're out for that monetary gain, and they want the money. So most likely, and I'll say 90+% of the time when organizations are hit with ransomware, they're not targeted. They're just, they're the end game of an opportunity for monetary gain because you had some level of risk, you had some level of exploit path or exposure that they were able to take advantage of and gain some money about it. Then there's no way we're going to be a target, right? So I call that the denial phase. Ultimately, here's the easy button on that one. It's not if, it's when. You've probably heard that. It's very cliche. But ultimately, if you're not taking a position of assumption of a breach or assumption of attack, honestly, you're going to be on the defensive and on your heels, right? You're going to get attacked. You're going to be exposed. Everybody, because they're opportunistic, everybody is at risk for this type of an attack. So ransomware, these folks who look for monetary gain, they're going to try to find any vector, any company, any vertical that they can go after, and really get that payment for what they're doing. It's a syndicate, it's a crime ring, and honestly, it's an epidemic these days. So just know the opportunity for attack is there, and they'll take it if they can achieve it. So the next myth I want to dispose is sometimes I hear from organizations, from leaders, do we even need to know who these attackers are? Does it even matter? If they hit us and they encrypt our information, do we need to know about them and what type of strand of ransomware hit us, what organization hit us, or even before the fact, do we need to know who these are? And the answer to that is absolutely, we do. Because number one, by knowing the malactors and their processes and their techniques, there's things called TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. By knowing the profile of these attackers, it gives us intelligence on how we can defend against it. And then from an incident response perspective, knowing these attackers like the Mazes of the world, the Contis, the R-Evils, knowing how they react after, there are many instances of organizations who they're not, I guess, as responsible as you would think they should be, right? Who would have thought, a malactor not being responsible? And many times they'll give you decryption keys that don't work, so their reputation for whether or not they're going to give you the decryption key is very, very important after the fact. So in many instances with incident response teams, they'll actually look at the reputation of these organizations and malactors and make a decision from there on whether or not they even want to negotiate ransom, right? So ultimately knowing who you're working with, who you're dealing with, who you're negotiating with is extremely important. And it's going to come to play with this next topic, cyber liability insurance. So I hear often cyber liability insurance covers us, right? So we should be all set. I have coverage, I have a policy. We shouldn't have to worry about it. Well, number one, take a deep dive into your insurance rider. See if ransomware is actually in there as a line item. Cyber liability insurance covers multiple things. Ransomware is just one of those activities that it could cover. The other side is there a provision in there on nation state attacks? Because if it's identified that the attack originated from a nation state, it may not be covered. Also know that when you go and apply for this cyber liability insurance, that there's attestations that happen during the process. You attest to have certain controls in place, to have certain technologies in place and certain processes in place, that if they, during the incident response process, find out that maybe you didn't have one of these controls that you attested to, that affects the reimbursement. You may not get reimbursed because you didn't have a specific control or technology in play that you attested that you had. So just know that's an option as well that could affect cyber liability insurance. Never mind the fact that it's not going to cover the outage time, the revenue loss, the brand and trust loss, all those other, the laws of unintended consequences of having a ransomware outage. Those items may not be covered either. So, I know of organizations who were down for 30 days, 60 days trying to recover, even more than that. Can your organization withstand that level of revenue loss and outage? Or brand trust, because you have to actually notify customers of a breach. You have to notify the state of a breach. And can you afford that level of brand hit because of an attack like this? And then the last thing is, if we pay, it'll just go away. Not necessarily the case either, right? So I had just mentioned earlier the fact that in many instances, you pay the ransom, you get a decryption key, and it may not work. There's actual entire incident response divisions dedicated, and I worked for an incident response company out of New York called Kroll. I worked with them a bunch at my previous position, and they would come to us from a technical and recovery perspective, and in many instances they had they'd have to shift that decryption key over to that team who could actually fix the decryption key so it would work. So there's divisions within incident response organizations that can take faulty keys that aren't working and fix them. I've seen ransomware organizations, take the money and run and just, shut down their operations and not give decryption keys. So, again, knowing that reputation of the ransomware organization is important, but also know that if you pay, it's not 100% guaranteed that you'll be able to decrypt all of the infrastructure that was encrypted or data that was encrypted and recover anything that may have been stolen. So the risk is still there. That's why even to date, the FBI, says to organizations, we recommend you don't pay, but understanding that some organizations can't survive it, right? And they may have to get to that level because all of their crown jewels were affected by this, including their backups and ability to recover. So the next item we want to talk about here is the profile of the attack, right? Again, it's extremely important to know what's happening during an attack because it can give us that intelligence about how we can protect ourselves better if we know these phases. Traditional antivirus doesn't cover it all. It's not like there's a payload that gets downloaded and all of a sudden we know, hey, there's a piece of ransomware on this machine. That's not always the case. There's processes involved. There's stages of this attack where the malactors, they really want to stay low profile. They want to stay under the radar. They don't want antivirus or endpoint protection catching them, right? So they want to stay low and they want to do things in a very slow manner. So that way, with weeks of persistence on an environment, then they go for the attack, then they go for the jugular. So I purposely put this here, and it's it's an iceberg, but you can see that attack that. The last phase, which is the encryption of data, is kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's so many other aspects that happen before that encryption of data that we really need to know about, so that way we can take the proper defensive measures. So I just put up here a profile of an attack, and it's the Ryuk attack chain, and it's based off the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is a framework about cybersecurity attacks and how malactors use a very standard process on how they attack you. So you can see how, and again, this is at a very high level, you can see the process of the attack for Ryuk, right? So ultimately there's a delivery, right? So this Ryuk is typically email, a phishing campaign, where you get a human to actually, click on something, and that malactor is able to get some level of persistence. So they download tools, right? So you receive an email, you have a human who clicks on that link. There's a user action, and then they install some tools, right? And those tools can be anything from a discovery scan, the ability to escalate privilege. They start doing some levels of reconnaissance within your organization, and this is all before that actual weapon gets put on your machine. They get a command and control persistence. So meaning by command and control is, let's say they have access to your laptop. Well, they're calling back, they're phoning home to the mothership for command and control. So that way they can start delivering other tools. They can deliver the weapon, right? And then they can give themselves the ability to have tools to escalate their privilege, lateral movement, so they can move around your network. They can go from the PC to a server, right, to a domain controller, to a database. So they start working on pivoting around your network because of lack of microsegmentation. And then from there, they identify the crown jewels. Now, this level of a process could be days, could be weeks. They could be in your system for a month doing this level of reconnaissance, because ultimately what they want to achieve is identifying and collecting information about all of the crown jewels within your organization so that they can have the biggest impact on you. They want to encrypt as much of your crown jewels as they possibly can, and really that last phase of the encryption. So at a high level, you can see, right, delivery, installation of some tools. Ultimately, they're going to get command and control, so that way they have remote access in to your environment and persistence there. Then you get to the point where things are encrypted. Then you get to the point of extortion, right? That's when they're starting to negotiate with you and they say, we want $20 million, or we're going to expose all of this, intellectual property on the internet, and then your brand is toast. So and honestly, you won't be able to operate either, right? You won't be able to get your servers and your machines and your data back. So give us that $20 million. So next agenda item is going to be threat intelligence and known paths of attack. This is really going to be that insight into how these malactors are operating today. So that way we can put those controls in place, know how they're interacting. And it's kind of great. This past Monday, I had mentioned that I'm a co-host of Business Security Weekly. I had the opportunity to interview, a leader in the industry. His name is Fleming Shee, and he's the CTO of Barracuda. He actually leads their company's threat research and innovation and engineering teams. And they recently came out with some intelligence through their intel team and a report really about the current state and known paths of attack for ransomware. So it really aligned well with this webinar today, because I was able to get some current state data about what's happening in out there in the industry. And it's amazing to see attacks have surged so much in 2021. They've increased dramatically. The demands that these ransomware organizations are asking for have skyrocketed. I remember the days when they would ask for $5,000, $6,000. It's going to be astounding. You're going to see here in a little while the average demand these days, and it's in the tune of millions and millions of dollars. And it's very scary. So they're going for high impact these days, and as high a monetary value as they possibly can. They're expanding their targets. They're looking at new industries. Go back 5-6 years, you'd be able to see government entities. There was a trend of the verticals they were attacking. We're at a point now where we're starting to get research on the verticals, and there's no holds barred. They're going after nonprofits. They're going after financial institutions. They're going after services industries. They're going after manufacturing. And we'll see a hit list here in a minute of all the, over the past 12 months, the verticals that have been attacked. But we're noticing now they're really shifting focus to say, we're going to go after any industry that's exposed, and we're going to reap the benefits of that exposure to for their financial benefit. And they're also evolving. They're evolving their capabilities. They're investing. So, when I say it's a business model, I'm serious about that. There are malactor organizations that have R&D departments. They do research and development, so that way they can see the new ways to attack. They're doing research and development against net new technologies that are coming out in the industry. And they're really getting deeply, deeply rooted into starting to look at supply chain attacks. So looking at applications that organizations use en masse, so they can use those applications as pivot points. That's dangerous. That's scary for me as a cybersecurity professional, that, these malactors are hitting the supply chain, so that way they can get the economies of scale of attack for everyone who uses those softwares, who uses the company's services. They really want that one-to-many relationship where they can maximize the economies of scale and get more victims of their attack. And they're attacking the crown jewels. They're attacking your data. They're attacking your ability to recover. They want access to your backup so that way you can't recover. And there's no holds barred as to what they're attacking these days. So you can see here some of the exploit paths that Fleming and I had talked about this week. Obviously, phishing and social engineering is big. This is the importance of making sure you have a good cyber awareness program, that it's a shared responsibility across all of your organization's business units, that you're having the right conversations, you're teaching folks what to look for, and really so they can identify and raise their hand and create a culture of, I'd rather you be wrong about a phishing attack and let us know about it, than not say anything and it's truly a phishing attack. So opening up that culture, and aligning it to folks' personal lives, right? That's something that I've noticed works really, really well. It brings the best practice from home into the workforce. So, being able to take that exploit path and nullify it as much as you can is very important. We're seeing exploitation of VPN and remote connectivity software that organizations use, exploiting vulnerabilities in VPN. So that way they can get persistence on a network and start working through that process that I showed you earlier. Third-party vendors. This is huge. This is a very, very important thing to look at as an organization, a risk factor that I believe every organization should dive deep into. You're only as strong as your weakest link. And in many instances, you have third-party vendors who have the keys to the castle to your organization in one way, shape, or form. The example I always use is I rewind all the way back to the Target days. Nobody knows who Fazio Engineering is. Nobody, right? But Fazio Engineering is the HVAC vendor who started the Target breach. So from a third-party vendor risk management perspective, it's extremely important to know who within your organization uses third-party services, vetting those third-party services for their security posture, their compliance posture, and really making sure that that's not going to be the weak link that allows a malactor into your organization to do harm. So third-party vendor risk management is a very important exploit path that you want to make sure you're remediating. Web application vulnerabilities. I mean, we're in the day of remote workforce. We're in the day of accessible applications on the internet, exposing your applications out to the internet so that way your workforce and your customers can connect to you and do business with you. Well, those vulnerabilities are allowing for attack paths, and we're seeing it on the rise because more and more as organizations are going through their transformation journey, we're seeing these vulnerabilities grow. So they're, especially now during, at the tail end of the COVID cycle, so many organizations had to leverage technology just to continue to do business, that it was almost a knee-jerk reaction. Let's implement this technology so we don't lose revenue. We can continue to do business with our customers. And really, they didn't take that deep dive into whether or not it was a secure application. Well, these malactors are now taking advantage of that and saying, you want to know what? We see that folks were putting technology out there quickly because they had to. It was necessity for their business. We know that they didn't, do the diligence that they would normally do because they had to do it so rapidly and deploy so rapidly. Let's take advantage of all these web application vulnerabilities that we're seeing out there on the internet and really attack those and make those our point of entry. Credential-based attacks. We always talk about strong passwords and identity protection. Still a huge method of attack. Creds allow for number one, persistence within an organization in the network, and then your credentials, your passwords allow for elevated an escalation of privilege. So having that level of diligence, having that hygiene for credential-based attacks is extremely important protection. So, I always recommend as we're talking to our clients about that, let's create a scenario where you have that layered approach for credential management, strong passwords, MFA, all of those protections that we can put in place from an identity perspective to create friction for these malactors and not allow them to just scrape passwords and be able to be on their way. Let's make it very difficult. Exploit chaining. This is something where, because there's so many vulnerabilities in organizations that are left untouched, they start putting different vulnerabilities together in a chain, and they use that for their ability to pivot around an organization, elevate their privilege within an organization and within applications, and really take advantage of that encyclopedia of vulnerabilities that many organizations have, because they don't have either the security team to pay attention to it, they don't have the budget to be able to remediate, or the IT teams are running 1,000 miles an hour, and ultimately they need support of maybe a partner to help them with identifying some of these vulnerabilities and exploits. But these malactors are getting really good at chaining all these vulnerabilities together and building a path to success for their attacks. And then network pivoting. This is something that I talk a lot about, microsegmentation, and really segmenting out your network so you can mitigate the risk as much as possible while allowing your business to operate, but not have a wide open network where, a user network where you'd have your laptops and your end users. You're limiting, you're putting access control lists and things in place like that won't allow them to the server network, won't allow the blast radius of any type of attack to spread. So really micro-segmenting your network is important. So from a trends perspective, this is something else that we talked about this week with the CTO of Barracuda. From an industry side of the aisle, no holds barred. Healthcare, services, insurance, engineering, manufacturing, utility companies, critical infrastructure, I put in there as well, education, and that's K through 12 and higher ed, right? There's no limits there. And we're starting to see more and more on the nonprofit side, I had said earlier. Government has always been a target. It stays consistent, but at the end of the day, it still ranks high on the attack list. So public sector, police departments, EMS departments, your traditional town halls and things of that nature, they're getting attacked more and more. Your state governments are getting attacked more and more. And hey, by the way, if you're paying attention to the news, you've seen some federal organizations getting hit. That's why you're seeing such a high focus these days on cybersecurity at a federal level. So extremely important. Another thing that's made ransomware kind of kick into gear is cryptocurrency. The ability to have anonymous payments has really, set these malactors and organizations off to the races. It enables them and empowers them. While it's a great technology and something that can be used for good, as in any type of technology, can also be used by malactors for bad. So this is just an enabler that we're seeing. Having cryptocurrency, things like Monero. They've shifted away a lot from the Bitcoin side of the aisle just because there's a lot of controls there. And we've seen some interaction from federal governments to really shut down some instances, but they're shifting over to different type of cryptocurrencies. And as these new cryptocurrencies come up, they just start utilizing those as their payment methods. So, as these new threats surface, there's new payment methods that we're seeing. Another enabler that we're seeing really, from a high level is the business. I'll call it the business of ransomware negotiation. Incident response teams are now bringing in ransomware negotiators to have conversations with these malactors to say, listen, I know you asked us for 22.5 million, but we're willing to give you 11. Are you good with that? So we see instances like that happening, and the malactors know it. So they're actually deploying negotiation tactics. They're becoming very wise in how they're negotiating with these organizations. For example, we saw JBS. That's the $22.5 million example I just gave you. They negotiated down to 11. Right. There was a large chemical distributor recently that out of Germany, they were asked for 7.5. They ended up paying out 4.4. So from that perspective, the malactors know they're going to get paid. So why wouldn't they ask for the stars? And if they hit the moon, they're going to be successful. And then here's the big number that came out of the conversation that we had this week. Here's the average ransom demand out on the market today. This was every ransomware attack that happened over the last 12 months. On average, this was the demand. $10 million on average. Think about that. Can your organization sustain something like that? Can it sustain $1 million, right? Can it sustain $5 million ask? That's the question we all need to ask. And, ultimately, just so you know, kind of the stats, only 18% of the incidents that happened over the last 12 months were the demand was less than 10 million. So that's only 18%. 30% of those ransomware incidents, the ask was greater than $30 million. That's incredible. Almost a third was greater than a $30 million ask. So, ask yourself, is it worth that level of risk to your organization? Knowing that the monetary stakes are so high, knowing that the brand risk is so high, knowing that your outage costs are so high. Think about this. This is just the ransom payment. This is not you being down and not being able to service your customers, not being able to generate revenue as an organization. This is the ransom that you have to pay. So can your organization withstand a hit like that? And in many instances, most instances, not. We see a lot of organizations going out of business because of it. I think for small businesses, it's up over 60% that go out of business. So a little bit more on trends. I had mentioned earlier, crime syndicates. This is from CrowdStrike's recent report on e-crime. So they looked at 2020. They released the report. I want to say it was 3 or 4 months ago. And these are the crime syndicates that are out there that are using each other. They're using each other's services to attack organizations. There's an increase right now of what we call access brokers. So those are threat actors who their only job is to really go in and get back-end access to your network. They want to find the persistence. They want to find the hole. They want that access that they can sit there and they can hide, and then they can go sell that access to other criminals. Those other criminals will come in and do the things like I had mentioned in the ransomware process. They'll come in and they'll do the reconnaissance. They'll get command control to their mothership. They'll put their version of ransomware that in many instances they may have purchased from another one of these syndicates and really put down that ransomware that they didn't even build. Maybe they modified it a little bit, but they may have purchased it. And ultimately, that becomes, the full-blown attack. So they're actually using each other as service providers, and they're paying each other for their level of service. And it really, honestly, from a business model, it creates economies of scale for them. But this is how they're able to enhance their capabilities, right? Enhance their capabilities to a point now where we've always had conversations around ransomware where the majority of the attack are around Windows operating systems, Windows servers, things of that nature. Well, we're starting to see a lot more on the Linux side. We're starting to see a lot more of attacks on ESXi, virtualization hosts that are built off of Linux versions. So they're really expanding their techniques. They're expanding their technologies. They're expanding what they're doing because they're taking all of these tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars and reinvesting it back into their research and development so they can find better, more efficient ways of attack. So, at the end of the day, you can see here another screenshot that I have here from that report, but you can see they're broken up into really 3 different divisions. They have services syndicates, they have distribution syndicates, and then they have monetization syndicates. Folks who will actually do the money laundering and transfers of payment. So it's very structured and very focused on how they're doing these things, and that's how they get really, really good at what they do, and they're all making money off of us. They're making money off of our organizations, simply because either we don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the staff, we don't have the budget to remediate a lot of these issues, and it's becoming a very, very big business here in the world today. E-crime is huge. To the point where adversaries are starting to look at specific focus verticals, right? So you have some of these organizations who are looking at, we're only going to attack retail and point of sale systems. We're only going to attack financial services providers. And they'll build exploit campaigns focused on just those type of verticals. And earlier I had said, that targeting doesn't happen unless it's nation state, but we're starting to see non-nation state vertical targeting because of the expertise that these organizations have in exploitation campaigns against certain industries. They've had success in retail, so they focus on retail. They've had success in financial services or business services. They focus on those type of verticals, and then they target you that way, right? So, this intelligence again came from CrowdStrike's intelligence report that came out this year, and from our side, reading this report, we're finding that now there's niches in industrial, mechanical, engineering, manufacturing firms. They're starting to really focus on those sectors and have focused targeting as an e-crime, let's call it unit or syndicate, focusing on these organizations and these verticals. So now here's where the rubber hits the road. How can we defend against these type of ransomware attacks? With everything that I just showed, it looks complicated. It looks like our backs are against the wall. We're on our heels. These crime syndicates are so powerful and have so many resources, and in many instances, our organizations don't even have a security team. We have an IT team who plays the role of corporate security and corporate compliance and corporate risk mitigation from a technical perspective. Ultimately, enough for us to be successful, it's building a business resilience strategy, because there's so many components that come into play here, so much responsibility in an organization across business units to really take a hold of this as a business strategy and be successful as an organization and being resilient. Because at the end of the day, you may be able to mitigate attacks, but having a resilient strategy is a strategy that says, even if we do get attacked, the risk is going to be minimal, because we've protected our organization in a way that the blast radius is small, and it's not going to affect our entire company, affect our entire organization or our customers, and it's not going to affect our data being exfiltrated or exploited. So just some of the best practices that I want to share. Some folks here may have heard of NIST. It's about creating a framework and having a framework that you can manage to successfully. Being able to identify, if you don't know what you don't have, you can't protect it. So identify things, right? Asset management, really knowing what's in your organization, having the controls to protect your organization, like access controls, email security, and leveraging it. Adoption is a huge problem with these technologies. You buy the blinky light, but you don't have the capability to adopt, 80+% of the capabilities of these technologies. So they're not going to be successful. And that's really where getting expertise to help you out and really get these technologies to a point where you're adopting the majority of the feature functionality is important. And then detection. We saw the kill chain. We saw the process. If you can identify that attack before that ransomware explodes and starts spreading throughout your organization, you can mitigate it and you can stop it. So having the ability to detect through network monitoring, SIM-SOC type, SOC is Security Operations Center. So having some type of visibility into the telemetry that's happening in your network from a security side will allow you to get ahead of the game. And then if something does happen, how do you respond? And then how do you recover successfully with minimal impact to your organization? So that way, again, that blast radius is small if something does happen. So, from a customer's perspective, NIST is a framework that I've used. NIST cybersecurity framework is kind of that entry level best practice and control set. And if you have any questions around that, please feel free to ask, reach out to us. We can help you with building out these type of programs, because again, it's about getting started and then continuously improving throughout this entire cycle of the cybersecurity framework. Now, one of the aspects I do want to highlight, and I've seen certain manufacturers, certain companies do this really well, and I'm going to highlight Microsoft for a second, because so many organizations are dependent on Microsoft. They use the Office 365 suite, the M365 platforms. In some instances, if you're on that level of your journey where you're, like many are, migrating to the cloud, right? Migrating to Azure, migrating to M365, these tools are readily available for you. So leveraging what's available to you is super important. So I just want to highlight that, Microsoft does this really, really well, because they're so pervasive in organizations these days. They help run the business. So they have to be focused on security. So having these trust principles is important. Having a mindset of always verify identity, right? Verify users, verify the devices that they're on. Make sure that they're supposed to be accessing the resources, the data, the applications, the infrastructure that they're asking for. So make sure you're doing that level of verification. Use least privilege access. Make sure that folks who are asking for access, they have access to what, from where, and when, based on your policies, right? So who can access what, from where, and when. So you have that level of least privilege. And then the assumption of breach, I talked about that, earlier. It's funny, it's kind of the hot topic over the last 5 years, but I was first exposed to assumption of breach mentality back in 2005, 2006. It was actually the CISO of the University of Washington, Kirk Bailey, who said, it's not if, it's when. Assume that there's a breach, and your job as a security team is to make sure the exposure is minimal, because folks are going to get in. It's a scenario where there's a lot of malactors out of there. They only need to be right once, and we have to be protecting and be right all the time as defenders. So really take that assumption of breach mentality and make sure you're hardening and putting controls in place to create a lot of friction for those malactors. And then that zero trust architecture is really about focusing on identity, your endpoints, which is your devices, protecting your data, your applications, your infrastructure, and your network. And again, the same concept, but a little bit, I blew it out a little bit. Protecting your entire digital footprint, right? So looking at identities and putting things in place like multi-factor authentication, making sure you're looking at user behavior from a risk perspective, a session to certain assets, looking at the devices in figuring out what type of risk state they're in. Are they patched? Do they have EDR on them? Do they have some type of endpoint protection? Is it part of your inventory to be allowed access into your applications or infrastructure or data? Creating a level of threat and intelligence through, and again, I use the example here of Microsoft. I mean, they have probably the most threat telemetry in the world, just because, again, how pervasive they are out in the world as far as business systems and platforms. So they have an abundance of threat intelligence. So use that to your advantage to create policies that'll allow you to do things like adaptive access to applications, threat protection to network, right? And ultimately having that diligence where you can start classifying and labeling data. So that way, the identity in the device, if it doesn't meet a certain policy, because it's classified, because a piece of data is classified as internal only, maybe they don't have access to it, right? So you can create those real dynamic policies and real-time policy evaluation based on identity and device to protect your data, your applications, your infrastructure, and your network. Now, just some of the technologies that are available. Again, you can see here, I blew out this Ryuk ransomware again, and you can see all of the protections that are in play that in many instances, if you have Microsoft licensing, you can take advantage of, right? So they have their antivirus, they have their EDR, they have MFA that can protect at the identity stage. They have advanced threat protection. So when discovery is happening or command and control is happening, it alerts and it can remediate. You have host level firewalls that prevent lateral movement, right? Along with the EDR and antivirus. And then tamper protections, right? For devices, you have the ability to put the classifications on the data to protect those as well. So that way, if they're going after a data set and they don't have the right identity credentials, they don't have the right device within your asset management database, and ultimately, they're coming from a location that's not approved from a geolocation perspective, it's going to stop that traffic. It's going to stop them from being able to access it. And again, these are a lot of tools that are available natively depending on the licenses you have in Microsoft 365. So here are some of the, I broke it out a little bit deeper here where you can see, from an identity perspective, it's Microsoft Azure AD, Endpoint Manager from a device side of the aisle. You can use Azure networking for that micro segmentation we talked about if you're on that journey to Azure and having your machines and your servers up in the cloud. Microsoft Cloud App Security, where you can have access controls to applications, and then really that data protection, right? That information protection that you can classify, label, and encrypt data that you consider sensitive or that you don't want people to have access to. So at a high level, and then we'll open it up for questions, really, what are the things we can be doing to protect ourselves? So we have some takeaways from here, right? I mean, ultimately, that's the goal, is to share information with you about current state of affairs, what the techniques were that these malactors are employing, and then some takeaways on what you can be doing to protect your organization. Number one is best practices and basics. I showed you that NIST program, NIST cybersecurity framework. Start looking at that. Look at the ability to identify your assets, protect those assets, all the way through the cycle to the ability to recover if you need to. And when I say, cybersecurity best practices, I can say that easily, but it's a do hard, right? It's one of those things where say easy, do hard. You have to be focusing on patching constantly, getting rid of those vulnerabilities as quickly as you possibly can, making sure your users, especially your privileged users, have strong passwords. They have MFA enabled, so that's a multi-factor authentication, so that there's two identifications to whether or not you can actually log into a system. You know, it's a password and then it's something you have. Limit privileged accounts. Don't have administrators all over your organization. That just increases that risk level by having more accounts that can be exposed and compromised. Email protection is a basic these days, right? You have to have some level of protection at the email side where you're filtering those emails, you're looking for those threats, and you're really pinning those down and putting those aside before they ever hit the inbox, before they ever hit the end user. You want to stop those threats. Modern day endpoint detection and response, very, very important. Traditional AV, that's definition based, time and time again. Had conversations as recent as this week about having to move to EDR from traditional definition based antivirus. They just don't work, right? They're not up to date quick enough. You have to wait for the definitions to come down from the manufacturer. You want more of a real time protection from an EDR platform. And then the human side, right? Make sure you're having conversations with staff. Make sure you're training them. Cyber awareness is huge. It's absolutely important because it's a shared responsibility. Let me go back one more. Sorry about that. And then again, zero trust. Protecting identity, protecting devices, applications, your network, your infrastructure, doing things like geo-blocking, super important from a zero trust perspective. Making sure that folks only have access when they're supposed to, from what account they're supposed to, at even if certain times of day you want them to have access. So really getting tight on your access controls, your identity management, your device management into your network, into your applications. BCDR strategy, recovery. Make sure you have the ability to recover if something does happen. Make sure your backups won't be compromised. Having conversations around things like immutable storage, inaccessible backups, so you have them segmented off of your network so nobody can get to them unless you need them, and your administrators can get to them. Protecting that level of crown jewel, that's your recovery strategy if you do get hit by ransomware. I mean, that's something that absolutely needs to be done. There's too many instances of folks thinking they can go back to a backup and they realize that's been encrypted and exfiltrated as well. Now they have nowhere to go. And then leverage a trusted partner. I talked about the skills gap. There's 3 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs in the world today. That means we don't have enough people, right? And if your organization doesn't have cybersecurity expertise, doesn't have the maturity of the cybersecurity expertise that you want to have and that you aspire to have, leverage a trusted partner. We have to do this together. Cybersecurity and these cyber attacks are an epidemic these days, and the only way to really be successful is to start leveraging the talent that's out there, and let's come together as business partners and do this together. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is test, 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 test. Test your cybersecurity maturity from a program level. Test your technical vulnerabilities from the outside, meaning internet into your organization, but also test them from the inside out, which means if an end user was exposed, what would happen in a situation like this? Test your BCDR strategy. Cybersecurity and recovery and resilience is all about muscle memory. I talk about this all the time. Coming from the military, we always say, train the way you fight. If an incident happens tomorrow and you haven't trained and you don't know what steps, what protocols, what processes to follow, it will be utter chaos. It'll be chaos for your organization. It'll be chaos for your customers. And ultimately, it'll be a lot of stress on your IT team and chaos for the IT team as well. So focus on strategic testing. Focus on proving out the technologies you have in place. Focus on analyzing and assessing the vulnerabilities that exist today on a periodic basis, because one configuration change can change an entire threat vector within your organization. So if you test today, a month from now, that test could come out totally different from your ability to be resilient. So test, test, test is the last thing that I will leave you with. So next steps. I know I talked a little bit over. We have about 5 minutes more for questions. I'm willing to stay on a little bit longer if folks want to, but ultimately I'll open up the floor for any questions that may have come in from the chat. and then I'm more than willing to answer them or connect with you on the side later on. So Jeremy, any questions coming in?
I don't see any questions this moment.
Okay. All right. Well,
so everyone who is on, if you've been saving, I think they were all riveted by the presentation itself. If you do have any questions, you can hit them up right in the chat now. We do have a few more minutes that we can get Jason to answer those.
Yeah. So while we have that, I just want to, alert the folks here on some upcoming webinars that we have. From a technology perspective and a digital transformation perspective, we had advanced teams for managers and C-suite. So really enabling your C-suite to use Teams to its fullest. It's a very powerful tool for collaboration and information sharing and communication. So we want to make sure folks are set up for success there. Rethinking conference rooms. I mean, think about it. We're living in a hybrid world these days, a hybrid workforce. So having technology-enabled conference rooms and the ability to have these suites of technologies empower a hybrid workforce is extremely important today. So we're doing that out in September. And user training for Teams. So if you need that, we have that out toward the end of September. And then another webinar that I'm going to be on, you've invested, but have you tested, right? So the last thing I talked about was test. That's what this webinar is going to be about. You bought all of these technologies. You bought all of these widgets and blinky lights. Are they working for you? Are they doing what they're supposed to do, right? Are they configured in the correct way to get the most positive outcome out of these technologies that you can possibly get?
Thank you, Jason. So we do have a question and kind of a big one here. It says, I know there isn't one program that covers all, but what are the best security softwares? Norton, ?
So, from my professional experience, I'm not going to, I'm not going to blast any manufacturers, but what I will say is, you can look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant and look at, and so this I'm going to speak because you mentioned Norton. I'm going to speak to the EDR side, the endpoint protection side. If you look at Gartner, it tells you right away who the leaders in the industry are. Honestly, which is, if you talked to me 10 years ago, never in my life would I ever think I would say this coming out of my mouth as a security professional for 20 years. Microsoft is a leader in endpoint protection, which is absolutely amazing with what they've done with Defender. Then you have other folks like the CrowdStrikes of the world. You have the Carbon Blacks of the world. Those top EDR. So endpoint detection and response is the keyword you want to start looking for. So that's the next generation of antivirus. Norton is one of those definition-based antivirus companies that I talked about earlier. Start looking toward next generation endpoint protection. And honestly, if you're part of the Microsoft suite, you have Windows laptops, Defender's there. Defender is powerful. My security team has ranked EDR products against each other, and they come up high on the list as far as, endpoint detection and response. And it's part of what you buy. And if you have the right licensing, you can get even more power behind that on the Microsoft 365 side. So, at the end of the day, my suggestion is leverage Defender to its fullest before you leverage one of those definition-based antivirus programs, because you'll get more power and you'll get more positive outcome and you'll get more for your investment out of doing that than you would that definitions-based antivirus. So I hope that answered the question from the endpoint, because there's so many other technologies from network protection, cloud protection, app protection. I could go down that rabbit hole, but since Norton was mentioned, I figured I'd go after the EDR space.
Excellent. Jason, here's another one. It says, my parent company had us install CB Defense for AV malware defense, but won't give me access to admin consoles, stating that I don't need to see it and that the program will take care of any issues that may come up. Is there anything I can run alongside CB Defense that'll give me a view of what my users or devices are experiencing?
Absolutely. So again, those EDR products that I just talked about, Microsoft, if you do have M365 licensing, you can get visibility into all of those Defender endpoints, right? And ultimately, if you have Defender on them, you can get visibility into what's happening all the way down to a process level within that EDR product. So, I'm all about economies of scale and using what you have to your best ability. If you've invested there already, right, and you have the licensing you need and talk to us, right? We'll let you know if you have the right licensing level within Microsoft. It may be one license upgrade, and you'll get the visibility into the security and compliance side of your endpoints that you need to be successful. And hey, by the way, it's already there, right? You don't have to buy a new product. It's going to give you that intelligence that you need. And I mean, the product that you mentioned, I would suggest you do that on top of it anyway, right? Because I'm all about layers. I love layers of security. Turn Defender on. Have that working, right? Have that extra layer, and then we can chat about your strategy about getting the visibility into those endpoints that you need, and you'll get way more visibility than the current product that you have, guaranteed.
Jason, it's interesting because one of the things I hear here at Envision a lot is that when we do security assessments, we find organizations that have protections they didn't even know about that aren't turned on, that aren't properly configured. They've paid for it. It's part of their licensing, and they're not taking advantage of it. So it sounds like what you were just saying about you may already have Defender. It just needs to be turned on. It seems to me that is a good first step, is one of those assessments to see really what your, a third-party assessment to see what your landscape looks like right now.
Yep. Test, right? Let's take a look at your current state. We'll have conversations with you from a business perspective, because every business is different. Every risk tolerance is different. We'll have conversations with you about what that future is, and we'll identify the gaps, and we'll get you there. We'll get you on that pathway based on, what you need today, what your budget looks like, what the appetite of the organization looks like, and what your risk tolerance is. We'll put you on a path. We never go in saying, listen, you're going to have to come in and spend $5 million to get where you need to be. What we do is we put you on a roadmap, so that we go on a journey. So your investments are wise investments in security. You're making strategic investments over the long term. And by the way, don't just go buy a blinky light that you don't adopt, right? Buy a technology that you can implement at least 80% and adopt 80% plus. So you're reaping the value out of that investment. And that's a perfect prime example right there of an investment that you may already have, that you may just need a partner to come in and work alongside you for a little while to tune it to where it needs to be successful for you. And then you can eliminate other technologies that you had because you're getting the benefit. And probably, from what I've seen, you're going to get more benefit out of tuning something like that you've already invested in, especially in the Microsoft suite. They've upped their game over the course of the last 5 to 10 years. They've started up in their game. So use what you have. Absolutely. Use those investments wisely. It's not all about the tools, right? It's not about having all these best of breed tools. It's about effectively using the right tools in the right place within your organization.
Excellent. Well, Jason, I think we're at time. So thank you very much for your presentation today, and everyone who's joined us. Thank you for joining us. As Jason mentioned, you can see some upcoming sessions that we have. We hope to see you there as well. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Feel free to reach out. Have a good day.